Thank you, Jason, and good morning to all of you. Good morning. Jason, even though I sometimes also think of myself as a 25-year-old, I actually celebrated my 37th birthday this week, and my body helps to remind me that I am not 25 anymore. But as Jason said, yeah, it's true. My name is Bobby Weaver. And it is a pleasure to be with you this morning. I told the 9 o'clock gathering that I thought they were weird for getting up so early, but now I feel like I'm back amongst my people, the late risers. So I'm glad to be with you. Thank you for having me. I handed the kids off to my sister last night, so I didn't have to worry about them this morning. I've already had probably too many cups of coffee, and so I'm starting to feel a little bit normal again. But last week, when I was chatting with Clint after the service, he said apparently even some of the folks on staff at Foundation had no idea who the heck I am. So all they knew was that I went to college with Clint. And I'll tell you, if you want to know more about the deep connection that Clint and I have, you need to ask him about a song called The Little Red Wagon. I'll leave that for you and him to discuss. But Jason listed some of, I guess, what are things on my resume. But yeah, I worked at a church. I went to a Bible college, and I went to seminary, and I've preached before. But I'm not certain that a list of like jobs and experiences really gives you the best sense of who I am. So I want to talk for just a second about some things that I like. I like all things nerdy. I love the writing of J.R.R. Tolkien, who is the author of Lord of the Rings, and if you're a big nerd like me, you know that he's also the author of The Silmarillion. One of my proudest moments as a father was actually when my son Abe and I had finished reading Return of the King, and I was saying, I'm going to take the book back to my office now, and he said, wait. I want to look at the appendix. I want to look at the maps. I want to look at the index of words, and I was like, this kid gets it. I actually took a course in college called Introductory Elvish Language. That's how big of a nerd I am. I also like dad jokes. I have a habit of putting the setup for dad jokes into the special instructions in my fast food orders, like when I use the app at Chick-fil-A. And it's gotten to the point where I have kind of a reputation at the Line Creek Chick-fil-A, where some of them have recognized me as the dad joke guy, and I can see them like smile and laugh when I start to pull up, and they like grab their friends like, here he comes. But then I've also seen the other reaction, where people see me coming and they start running. Well, you guys know the key to a good dad joke, right? It has to be apparent. Sorry, Clint told me that I wasn't supposed to cause drama, but I think I just divided everyone right here into the dad joke lovers and the people who hate me for saying that. But I think that gives you a better idea of who I am, but I also think that there's probably even a better way to know some things about me, and that's to talk about some things that I don't like. I don't like waiting in line, okay? My idea of hell, like if hell was personalized to me, would be waiting in line at Six Flags. Like it's hot, I'm dehydrated, I've got a headache, and every time I turn a corner, there's like another mile of line for me to wait in. That is cruel and unusual punishment. I also don't like it when like I pull up to a stop sign after somebody who is already there and they try to wave me through. Hate that. I don't like it when things are popular just because they're popular. Like the Kardashians, okay? People who are famous for being famous. I resisted getting an iPhone for years because I didn't like the fact that everybody had them. I think I wanted to be different. An example of that kind of desire comes when I hang out with my brother and my in-laws and my parents who all love sports, pro and college, basketball, baseball, and especially UGA football. One of my favorite Christmas presents recently was a t-shirt that says, I just hope both teams have fun. I'm a type 1 on the Enneagram personality profile, which means I'm detail-oriented, and I love information, and kind of sometimes arrogantly love to correct people. Sometimes I like to be argumentative. I like to be contradictory. And I like to be the nerd who speaks up when someone misspeaks, and I push up my imaginary glasses and I say, actually. So how is it that I was tasked with talking about kindness? In fact, when I told my wife Sarah that the topic for my sermon was kindness, she laughed out loud at me. Said, "You?" Yes, me. Dad joke telling, silly t-shirt wearing, trend hating, spelling, grammar, and punctuation correcting me. Kindness is not something that I think comes naturally to me. It's a challenge to be kind in a world that so often views kindness as weakness. The go-getters and the overachievers are the people who, they don't take no for an answer, right? They go out there and they pursue success doggedly, and it doesn't matter who they have to push out of their way to get there. Those are the people that we view as strong and successful. Kind people, by contrast, get taken advantage of. But today as we talk, what I hope to do is show that kindness doesn't just rely on you. It's not some battle of willpower, and it's not a matter of just trying really hard to be kind. Instead, I hope to show you that cultivating kindness starts with the Holy Spirit, and that nearness and strength that the Holy Spirit provides leads to a perspective that makes kindness possible, even easy, in the midst of a cruel and callous world. So over the past few weeks in our series on results, you've heard from some pretty awesome folks like Clint and Jason and Adam, and we've walked through some practical steps on how to cultivate things like love and joy, peace, and patience. But before we start digging too deep into kindness, I want to take a quick look back at week 1, where Clint set up this whole idea of the Holy Spirit equipping us. And I want to say a brief word about the author of our text, Paul. Around the same time as other big-name people in the Bible, folks like Peter and James, there was this guy named Paul, and he was walking around the ancient world. He was a leader in the Jewish community, and for a while, he had actually been trying to stop the spread of people following Jesus. In the New Testament, we hear about these guys called Pharisees, and most often they're kind of characterized as the bad guys. They are the opponents of Jesus. And Paul, he actually calls himself Pharisee of Pharisees. He's kind of like top level, expert in the law, big time Pharisee, big time opponent of Jesus. But one day, he has this radical interaction with Jesus, and he completely changes his mind. He becomes sold out for Jesus, and he spends the rest of his life teaching and preaching about the Son of God. And he does so impassioned and so emboldened that he's beaten and shipwrecked and imprisoned and hungry and starving and naked for the sake of Christ, this guy that one time was an opponent of Jesus. And I think perhaps the biggest change in Paul's life comes in his thinking, that at one time he thought the temple and the sacrificial system of Judaism was the way to God, the way that all people needed to relate to God for centuries. But it's no longer the way, because that temple, that sacrificial system is fulfilled in Jesus. So Paul writes these letters in the New Testament. A lot of the ones that are named after cities are attributed to Paul, and Galatians is one of those. He writes this letter to these young churches in Galatia because they're new. They're figuring out, what does it mean to worship and to follow Jesus in this new way? It's especially interesting because they're comprised of two very different groups of people. One group is Jewish folks, people who had been Jews and whose tradition and culture and experience and their identity was being Jewish, and now they follow Jesus. But this other group is people who had never been Jewish, who also want to follow Jesus. And unfortunately, there are some folks in that Jewish community saying that, okay, if you want to follow Jesus, that's great, but first you have to become a Jew. The guys say that, okay, adult guys, adult men, you have to be circumcised. You have to eat kosher. You have to not mix fabrics. You have to observe the Sabbath day. You have to celebrate the Jewish holidays like Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. If you follow the Jewish law first, then you can follow Jesus. Well, I love bacon, so immediately there's a problem. I was actually reading in a commentary from this guy named N.T. Wright, who's amazing, by the way. And Wright said that north of Montreal in Canada, there's this lake that freezes over, like solid freezes every winter. And people can actually, they drive their cars across the lake from shore to shore. Normally, there's like a ferry that goes, but when it freezes in the winter, they can actually get their cars, put the snow chains on, and drive across the frozen lake. Then when the spring comes, they actually take like an old rusted junky car and they put it out in the middle of the frozen lake. And as it thaws, eventually it sinks, and that's when they know, now we can't drive over the water anymore. They switch back to using ferry boats and stuff like that. And I think what Paul is doing is kind of like comparing the Jewish people to folks trying to drive a car across water. He says, you're being pretty foolish. He's telling the Galatians that the thaw has come between the shores of God and man, and that if we try to follow the Jewish law and the temple sacrificial system, it's like trying to drive a car over water. Now, Jesus is the way that we get to God, and anything else doesn't really make sense. In Galatians, Paul is giving perspective and direction to a church that needs to correct bad teaching. So that's a little background on why he's writing, but I also want to get some perspective on what he's writing. For centuries, the Jewish people had defined their identity as a people through their observance of the law. It was kind of like saying, we've got the law, we are God's people, especially not anyone else. They actually had physical markings through the act of circumcision to distinguish them as God's people. And everything about their food and their clothing and their behavior sets them apart and helps them draw lines around themselves to say, we are God's people. We have the law. We have the temple. We are in relationship with God. And everyone else, even the word that they use to describe not Jew, Gentile, means not Jewish. Just everyone else. Well, this week we celebrated the 4th of July, right? Pretty awesome being in the parade, getting to hang out with you guys. It's kind of a celebration, a party of our national identity. In the United States, I would imagine that probably most of us went home or to a friend's house or something after that parade, and we celebrated with the same similar kind of markings of identity. Things like clothing. You got to wear like American flag colors at least. Our food, you got to eat things like barbecue and hot dogs and hamburgers and apple pie. We probably shot off guns and fireworks and said things like freedom and America. These things, for better or worse, are kind of symbols of our national identity. And I imagine that if someone told you, okay, we're going to have to kind of leave those things behind, it probably wouldn't go very well. But think of it this way. Can you imagine if someone came up and said, you have to become an American first before you can become a Christian? The Jewish people are kind of thinking this way. And it isn't easy for them to give up these things, these markers of their identity. And it makes no sense, or it makes sense why so many Jewish people in those communities in Galatia had trouble kind of letting go of that culture, that tradition, and those things that they felt really gave them a sense of identity. But Paul says that's not the way. It's like trying to drive across water. Galatians is Paul's loud and resounding no to the people who claim you have to first become Jewish to then follow Jesus. And let's not forget, he used to be one of those people, a prominent Jewish leader, an expert in the law. This is a big deal. So Paul spends the first part of Galatians laying out just how backward and how silly it is to follow the Jewish law when Jesus is available. He's basically saying you used to be defined by these things, but now as God's people, you are defined by the Spirit. You had an identity that was defined by the mark of circumcision and by not eating pork and by observing the Sabbath and holidays that celebrate and looked forward to Jesus. We are now defined by the Holy Spirit, or more precisely, we are defined by the results of having the Holy Spirit in our lives. And that's what we see here when we read from the text in Galatians 5:22. You used to do it this way, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. The result of having the Spirit in your life is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. Not the goal, the result. It's evidence of a relationship. It's a marker of an identity. It's membership in God's people. It's not a list of rules and a checkbox that you have to fulfill in order to get entry. It's central to our identity as followers of Christ. It's the fruit of a relationship with Jesus and God's Holy Spirit inside of you. Now, I have a membership at Costco over in Sharpsburg. If you've not been there, it's pretty awesome. I mean, who all has a Costco membership? Yeah, that's right. I love it, right? The $1.50 drink and hot dog combo, the $5 rotisserie chicken, the free samples. I mean, the place is amazing, right? But what's the first thing you have to do when you go into Costco? Right as you're walking up to the door, Jay says it, yeah. You're holding up your Costco card. And even recently, I feel like they've been checking like photo IDs and making me show my driver's license to match my Costco card. They're getting a little strict, and I'm worried about my Netflix account that I'm sharing with my sister. And I'm starting to think, man, they're kind of cracking down here, right? But I have the ID card, so I get to show it. And sometimes I let my kids show it, and it's fun for them. But what that does is it shows that it's clear we belong. We've paid the money, we've signed the papers. We have evidence that shows, yeah, I've established a relationship with the Costco company. The card has my name and my photo on one side, and on the other, in big bold letters, it says Costco. And anybody that sees that, it proves that Costco and I know each other, that I'm not faking or stealing or trying to trick anyone. And I think the same could be said of our relationship with Jesus. That when we arrive in places in our life and we show kindness, it ought to be immediately clear to everyone in big, bold letters that we belong to God. Showing kindness makes it clear that we have a relationship with Jesus and that we're part of God's people. We have access to something bigger than ourselves, that we belong. When Clint baptizes people at Foundation, he talks about the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. The image there is like building a house, like the Holy Spirit comes and builds a house inside of you or takes up residence or moves into your life. And that Spirit becomes a part of you. And I think what Paul is saying here in Galatians is that when the presence of the Holy Spirit in our lives occurs, it ought to make a noticeable difference. It ought to show out and serve as an indicator that we have a relationship with God. The presence of the Spirit results in kindness. In about a week, my family's going to the beach in St. Augustine, so I think maybe me and Clint will like pass each other on the way or something. But I'm really excited about taking this trip. We've got, I think, like 16 or 17 or 18 family members all going to stay together in the same B&B, and we actually like each other, so that's going to be fun. My parents are here, my sister. We're going to spend a ton of time together, and there's going to be cousins, and I think we're going to sing karaoke. Like, it's going to be ridiculous and exciting and awesome. But to get there, we have to take this like 5 or 6 hour drive that is not particularly exciting. It's a long drive, and it takes a long time, depending on traffic and depending on whether or not I go when you try to wave me through a stop sign. So on the road, though, there are signs that you're getting closer. As you leave the Atlanta area, you'll start to see fewer and fewer pine trees. As you near Florida, you may notice evacuation route signs and gates. As you get even closer, like when you first cross into Florida, you see that big welcome sign. You'll see your first couple of palm trees. And then as you get closer, within the last hour or so, I think the changes really start to intensify. You start to smell the salt air. In the last few miles, you cross a marshland and you get that very distinctive sulfur smell. You start to see and hear seagulls. You recognize that something has changed, and it's clear that you are close to the ocean. The presence of that much salt water so near changes everything. The weather, the biology of the animals around you, and my mood changes because I know I'm on vacation and I'm at the beach. The presence of big, powerful things causes change. Kindness is an evidence that the Holy Spirit's presence is in our lives, that it's near to us. Kindness is evidence that the Holy Spirit's presence is in our lives. Earlier today, I talked about how being kind is not just a matter of really trying hard. And I think it would actually be pretty obvious, right? We think of that sometimes like a diet or a workout, but I have to be honest, if somebody was obviously trying really hard to be kind to me, I don't think it would mean very much. And that's because I think under our own power, we probably can't do it, at least not all of the time. Sometimes we lack the time or the motivation or even just the energy to be kind. This past few weeks, as I was thinking through this talk and starting to make notes and kind of thinking about what I wanted to say and listening to the other speakers who are awesome, I noticed that I kept finding myself presented with opportunities to be kind. I think there were people put in my path this week who needed kindness. And sometimes I did it, but sometimes I failed. And I can't help but wonder if the times that I chose not to be kind, maybe it had something to do with just how connected I was keeping myself in my relationship with God. So for the past couple of months, I've been working on a renovation of the bathroom at our house, and my wife would probably tell you it feels like it's been years that I've been working on it. I'm right in the middle of drywall right now, and the dust and the sanding and stuff like that is miserable. But a couple of weeks ago, I finished up a lot of the electrical work. I was actually up in the attic, and I found this random wire just laying there in the insulation. And it had some electrical tape wrapped around it, and I thought, what in the world? Maybe this is just left over from some other project. It was an older version, so I was it's probably not even used. But I was wrong. I found out in an instant, right away, that it was live, and immediately I felt the power. I felt inspired to move, I felt inspired to speak up and to say things loudly that I won't repeat here. But after a little recovery, I traced this wire back to the circuit panel. I turned it off. And what surprised me then was I went around the house trying to find out, all right, what did I just turn off? But everything was still working. The lights and the switches and the receptacles, they were all still fine. It was just this one circuit, this one wire abandoned in the attic, just not being used. It had power. It was working the way it was supposed to. It just wasn't connected to anything. In our lives, we may find ourselves presented with opportunities to be kind, but we may find ourselves lacking the power to act. We don't have the time, the energy, or the motivation to help because we're completely relying on ourselves to kind of drum it up out of thin air. I believe that the Holy Spirit can act as a jolt of conscience, inspiration to move and act and speak up. But we have to remain connected. We have access and power through the Holy Spirit to show kindness, even when we don't feel particularly energized or motivated. Kindness is evidence of the Holy Spirit's power in our lives. So with the Holy Spirit's presence, with the Holy Spirit's power, what does it actually mean to be kind? Some commentary I was reading this week characterized the word Paul uses for kindness as kind of like this two-sided coin, where on one side it's closely associated with helping, like kindness helps. And on the other side it's associated with avoiding cruelty. So kindness helps, kindness avoids cruelty. I talked about these opportunities that I've been seeing this week, opportunities to be kind. And the truth is that I think probably just as often as I have an opportunity to be kind, there's also an opportunity to be cruel. And I'd even suggest that those two are the same opportunities. Now, I don't normally enjoy being cruel randomly, and I don't just wake up and choose violence. More often than not, I think cruelty is a response to something that's happened to us. I feel a tug towards cruelty when someone criticizes me, or when someone annoys me, or when someone cuts me off in traffic. In those situations, I think that I tend to choose cruelty when I'm focused on me. But I tend to choose kindness when I focus on the other person. As Jason said, I get to teach at Point University. Most of them are online classes, and most of an online class is typically conducted in forum discussions, which as a student, I really hated, but now as an instructor, I really hate. I had a student for a while who just wasn't doing very well. His posts seemed to be kind of off topic, like he was missing the point. And his writing wasn't great. He kind of wrote poorly. And he posted late. And after about a week or two of just getting kind of irritated, because in my mind, this kid he didn't get it. He was being lazy. He wasn't motivated and didn't really care about the things that I did. So I reached out to him about my concerns, and I asked him kind of half-heartedly, like, what can I do to help? And after some back and forth, we finally decided to get together and have a meeting in a video chat. And that meeting completely changed my perspective. It turns out this kid was from South Africa. He had moved back from Georgia back to South Africa to help his parents run their family farm. And English wasn't even his first language. So what I had taken for laziness and incompetence and just apathy was actually very, very different. The fact was his time zone was 6 hours different from ours. The fact was that he was reading and then trying to write and post in his second language. The fact was his house had power and internet for limited times during the day that were rationed and that he had to pay for. The fact was he was working a full-time job and he was doing schoolwork in the little time he had left. But when my perspective changed from focused on me and my irritation and my kind of arrogance, shifted to a different kind of perspective, it gave me the kind of opportunity to pursue kindness, and it made that a much easier choice. That's the kind of perspective the Holy Spirit can provide for us. It wasn't about me anymore. It was easy then to help, to avoid cruelty, because my focus shifted from inward to outward. Now, I said earlier that I felt like the opportunities were showing up this week pretty often, but if I think more carefully about it, I think I was just noticing the opportunities more because of a change in my perspective. Kindness is evidence of the Holy Spirit's perspective in our lives, not mine. Kindness is the evidence of the Holy Spirit's perspective. And when we have that Holy Spirit perspective, the presence of the Holy Spirit, the power of the Holy Spirit at our backs, it shows out in our lives like an ID card that says in big, bold letters, I'm kind because I have a relationship with God. I am a Spirit-filled follower of Jesus. It's something, however, that we do have to cultivate, like fruit. It matters where we're planted, who and what we surround ourselves with. It matters what we take in, what we watch, what we listen to, what we feed into our lives. We have to be oriented towards the light and planted in a community like this and fed by meaningful nutrition. And then we bear fruit. Kindness is not even the goal per se. It's the fruit, the result. My son Abe is a Cub Scout. He's been doing it for a few years now, and he's worked up through the ranks. He started as a lion, and then I think it's like bear, wolf, tiger. Like there's a ton of them. But I think eventually you get to that highest point, which is the very highest rank you can achieve as a Boy Scout. Do you guys know what that is? Eagle Scout. That's right. It's a pretty prestigious achievement that something like only 6% of all people involved in scouting ever achieve. And as Abe's moved up through these ranks, he's got a number of these like badges and ribbons and patches that they put on their uniforms. And he keeps his uniform in pretty good shape, and he's proud to show off the things that he's done, the skills that he's acquired, these things that he's accomplished. And sometimes I think people will characterize the fruit of the Spirit like those badges, something that we acquire and wear proudly and show off. But I also know that there are scouts out there who have plenty of things on their shirts that they didn't really earn. They have the symbols, but not the substance. When I think about Eagle Scouts, I don't think about badges and ribbons and patches. I think of someone who is prepared, somebody that I can count on. Eagle Scouts know how to tie knots. Eagle Scouts know first aid. They're the most likely person when I'm struggling to open an Amazon package will pull a pocket knife right out and already be ready. The skills and knowledge that Eagle Scouts require are not external trophies for flaunting their pride. They're life skills that shape who they are and which equip them to be useful people that we can count on. And I think the fruit of the Spirit should be characterized that way. Kindness is the result of a Spirit-filled follower of Jesus, cultivating a skill that shapes who they are, how they think, and how they act. It demonstrates that they belong to God. I don't think that every act of kindness has to be some grand gesture that makes the evening news or changes somebody's life forever. Simple things are kind. Things like smiling first when you walk into a room. Things like saying hello. Holding a door. Kindness looks like maybe deciding not to post something that's hurtful. Kindness looks like tipping generously after lunch, even when the meal was more expensive than you expected, even when the food took forever to get there, even when the server forgot my ranch dressing. What an opportunity to show God makes a difference in my life. What an opportunity to be different from the cruel and callous world around us. Kindness is evidence of the Holy Spirit's presence and power and perspective. And when Spirit-filled followers of Jesus see an opportunity where they have a choice between being cruel and being kind, the result is kindness.